Welcome back to the Real Abilities Film Festival. My name is Isaac Zablocki. I'm the director and co-founder of Real Abilities. Thank you so much for being here. This is our second to last night. Tomorrow night is closing, so you have 30 hours, less than 30 hours to watch all the films that you haven't seen yet. Get cramming. There's great films. All of our conversations are, of course, recorded and put on our YouTube channel, so you could check them all out there as well. I don't know if you could do all of that in 30 hours, but please tell your friends this is the place to see these films now before they disappear into the ether of distribution. We are really excited about tonight's screening, and this is the Q&A for In a Different Key. First of all, for those who want captions, please click on the bottom of your screen, the live transcript, and you'll get live captions of this conversation. If you would like Spanish interpretation, you can go to the interpretation channel, also on the bottom of your screen. And we're happy to make this conversation as accessible as possible. We're also excited to make you a part of this conversation. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we can call on you to ask them live. Please keep your questions on target towards the film. And of course, like always, we want to have a respectful conversation. So that's all we ask, that these questions be in a respectful tone. We would be nothing without our partners, and we are so grateful to all the partners that make Real Abilities possible. You can check them all out on our partner page. I especially want to thank Vimeo, which is our conversation sponsor, and they have been making all of these conversations possible. Tonight, specifically for this conversation, I want to thank Action Play, Australia International Screen Forum, Friends of Access Israel, Kaiser's Room, Music for Autism, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center, and of course, I want to give a big thank you to, you'll hear more from them in a moment, the group that's moderating. They have been a founding partner of this festival, Next for Autism. So a big thank you to Next for Autism for leading this conversation. Every year when we're in person, we get to screen in many locations throughout the city. And this year being virtual, we ask our presenting partners to co-present some of these conversations. And tonight's conversation is being co-presented by Lincoln Center for Performing Arts. And I would like to ask Miranda Hoffner now to say a few words on their behalf.
Great. Thanks so much, Isaac. I'm Miranda Hoffner. I'm the Associate Director of Accessibility at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. I'm a white woman in my late 30s. I have red curly hair that's just past my shoulders, and I'm wearing a dark pink top with a headset and a mic. I'm coming to you from the Berkshires in Massachusetts. Lincoln Center is so grateful to have partnered with Real Abilities for the last 7 years. Thank you to Yara and Isaac and the whole Real Abilities team for sharing amazing films every year. When our team viewed In a Different Key, it immediately stood out to us. Lincoln Center has a long history of work with the autism community, both as audience members and as staff. The Passport to the Arts program, which has been around for about 30 years, welcomes hundreds of children's, teens, and adults with disabilities and their families to attend performances and workshops each year at no cost. A majority of our families are on the autism spectrum. In 2018, Lincoln Center mounted the Big Umbrella Festival, which was a month of arts programming specifically designed for young people on the autism spectrum, and it featured artists from all around the world. And then beyond our stages, the Access Ambassador Program is a job training program for high school students with disabilities. It is designed to provide supported work-based learning to combat the incredibly high rate of unemployment for people with disabilities. So when we saw In a Different Key, we knew it was such a great match as it explores issues of equity, belonging, and the role of community in giving everyone a space to thrive. We're so grateful to Caren, Zucker, and Donvan for the film, as well as the phenomenal book behind the film. Both have made such a profound impact on my understanding of autism, and I take that knowledge to work with me every day. And with that, I'd love to welcome everyone, and especially welcome our moderator, Jillian Leek from Next to Autism. Thanks for being here.
Miranda, thank you so much. And thank you to Lincoln Center. I will take your lead in saying that I am a white woman in my 30s with long red hair, and I'm coming to you from New Jersey tonight and very, very excited to be leading the discussion on this panel. I'm going to start off this evening by introducing, although I'm not sure they need introductions, but introducing the panelists to you and giving you a little bit about their background, and then we will get into some questions. Caren Zucker, director and producer of In a Different Key. Caren is a journalist and Emmy Award-winning network producer who's reported on a broad range of subjects, both domestically and internationally. As a producer for ABC's World News and Nightline, working alongside Peter Jennings, Charlie Gibson, and Diane Sawyer, she's covered economic summits, presidential campaigns, social trends, and the Olympic Games. She was honored for her role in ABC's coverage of 9/11 with two television's most prestigious prizes, the Peabody and the Alfred L. DuPont Awards. Zucker was the producer and co-writer of PBS NewsHour series, Autism Now. Her oldest son, Mickey's autism diagnosis inspired a new direction in her reporting to bring a better understanding of autism's realities. Zucker and her husband, NBC Sports producer John McGinnis, have 3 children and reside in New Jersey. John Donvan, director and producer in A Different Key. John Donovan's a veteran network correspondent and producer for ABC, CNN, and PBS, and host and moderator of the Intelligence Squared US debates, which are heard on public radio and by podcast. He's also been contributing editor to The Atlantic. During his journalism career, in addition to anchoring various ABC broadcasts, John served as chief White House correspondent and held multi-year postings in London, Moscow, Jerusalem, and Jordan. He wrote and reported for the documentary program Turning Point. The winner of 4 Emmys and the Overseas Press Club Award, he became interested in autism's impact on families upon meeting his wife, physician and medical school professor Ronit Mishori. Donvan has 2 children and lives in Washington, D.C. Amy Gravino is an autism sexuality advocate and relationship coach in the Center for Adult Autism Services at Rutgers University. She's also the president of Ascot Consulting, which offers autism consulting, college coaching, and mentoring services for organizations, schools, individuals on the autism spectrum, and their families. Amy's an international speaker who has given TED Talks, spoken twice at the United Nations for World Autism Awareness Day, and presented worldwide to audiences on a variety of topics related to autism, with a dedicated special focus and research on the subject of autism and sexuality. Ms. Gravino obtained her master's degree in applied behavior analysis from Caldwell University in 2010 and currently serves on the board of Specialistern, Yes She Can, the Golden Door International Film Festival, as well as the scientific advisory board of Simons Foundation Powering Autism Research. She's an award-winning writer whose work has been featured in Spectrum, the leading online news source for autism research, Reader's Digest, special education textbooks, and other outlets. And lastly, Stephanie Keeney Parks is joining us. Stephanie is a doctoral student at the University of California, Los Angeles in the Department of Anthropology, where she studies medical, psychological, and linguistics anthropology. She also possesses a master's degree in medical anthropology from Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. Stephanie's research centers on the everyday lives of Black parents who have children with autism. She is also interested in the process of diagnosing a Black child with autism, as well as the healthcare disparities that these families face. Stephanie is interested in centering the Black parent's narrative and experience as the expert to decenter white ideologies on health, healthcare, disability, and Black culture. Her research stems from her experience as a Black woman, wife, and mother of 2 children. Stephanie's oldest child is diagnosed with autism. So thank you to the panelists, and I think everybody's eager to jump in. So if I may, Caren, I would like to start with a question for you. And there are so many things that come to mind for me on this film, but why don't we start with, what inspired you to tell this story and make this film?
It started about 25 years ago when my son was diagnosed with autism. And John Donvan and I, John was a correspondent in ABC News and I was a producer. And I asked my friend and colleague to start covering autism with me so that we could begin to teach the world and help educate them about us. It was a story that had never been done before, actually, on network news. And we did that for about 20 something years. And then we just decided to write a book, which was In a Different Key, the story of autism, which really looked back into the past and the history of autism. And we felt after doing the book that there was still sort of more work to be done, that we hadn't reached what we call the civilians, the people who aren't connected to autism, who aren't related, who aren't educators, who aren't part of that community. And we felt that the film, through storytelling, could really talk to people outside of the community. And the film looks at the future. It takes a bit of a look at the past, but it also looks at the future at the same time, capturing the story of the first person ever diagnosed with autism, which is part of the book as well.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to look back on Don and for you to have tracked him down. And, notable to me is how many voices and perspectives you've captured in this film. John, could I ask you to talk about, knowing how many voices are out there, who was this movie made for, really? Oh, just unmute yourself.
Okay, so he's still muted. I can jump in. This movie was made for everyone. And it also, it was really, really important to us to cover the broadest part of the spectrum and the voices that are, too often not heard. But at the same time, we were really tuned into the fact that people who can speak for themselves and can advocate for themselves had a voice. But we were trying to capture, the broadest. Right. The broadest sides of the spectrum, because it's not often looked at. Are you
John,
there, John?
Are you with us now?
Yeah, but I'm glad I was able to show you what a trained broadcast professional can do with a microphone and can't do. I guess it's time to retire. I would just be repeating, I think, what Caren said, that we had these two. We do feel that the movie speaks to the autism community, as broad as it is and as disparate as it is. But we wanted to make the film popular, so we don't want it to be seen as a niche film. We want it to be seen as a film that will inform the civilians that people on the spectrum are part of our world, everyone's world, and that people on the spectrum have the kind of chance that they get to participate in our world, the world that we all share together, depends a lot on how the civilians treat them, respect them, fail to respect them, embrace them, fail to embrace them. That it can be very big stuff. It can be about, government policy, but it can also come down to small daily interactions. And we wanted the people who feel that they're not connected to autism to recognize that they are. And we wanted to do it by making the story easy to follow, fascinating, interesting, informative, surprising, delightful, enraging, humorous, moving, and all of those things, so that if you didn't know or care about autism and you happen to watch this movie because you heard the curious fact that the first person with autism has been found, that you would learn a lot more and be changed by it.
Thank you. Caren, a lot of this film tells your family story. Was it an easy decision to decide to feature that in the film? Or was it something?
That's a really easy answer.
Yeah.
I totally didn't want to be in the film. And I've been a journalist, I've been a producer behind the scenes for 30 years. But John, I will say to his credit, really thought that the way to reach the audience was to put my face and my story on it, because my son he's just one example of autism, but he's an interesting part of it, and it was a journey that I took and have continued to take, and that it was more important to have me helping to narrate the story than not doing that, which is I'm not comfortable on camera. even at this very moment, but I'm doing the best that I can because I think it makes a difference for the community. And I think my son is a pretty neat guy. And I think that he can teach people in his own way about difference.
Absolutely. I would speak and say, you know, I so appreciated seeing your story, and I could see the vulnerability in it, but also the authenticity of what you were trying to communicate to the audience. If we could move a little bit to Don and his story, a little bit of the background, if you would, on, you know, how difficult was it to track down Don and to see if he would participate and tell his story?
You're asking me? Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Well, you know, when Donald was first diagnosed, there were some clues of his name that we found from Dr. Lee O'Connor. And John and I did a lot of research, and a combination of the internet and, you know, our journalistic skills, and actually John's skill on the internet, because this was a long time ago and I don't have very good skills. We kind of together were able to narrow it down. And in fact, I was able to call I knew that he was from Forest, Mississippi, and I knew his last name began with a T. So I started to call all the T's in Forest, Mississippi. And one day an answering machine picked up the phone, and the person on the other end said, you know, hello, spring, and have a wonderful summer and a fantastic 2007. And I just sort of hung up, and I called John. I said, this is Donald. I know this is Donald. And, you know, we found him. And most interesting of that, though, was that we didn't want to just show up on his doorstep. So we reached out to people who we knew him and said, you know, we'd like to come talk to Donald. We don't want to just show up. You know, would it be okay if we, you know, kind of arrived in Forest? And that's when we immediately learned about how special the community was that Donald lived in, because the man we were talking to, who was in fact in the film as well, said to us, well, we'll introduce you to him, but if you mess with him in any way, we will hunt you down and get you. They were very protective of Donald. And that was just, you know, the very first indication. But that's what we saw everywhere we went, the love and protection and commitment to this man who they didn't actually know had autism growing up. They didn't know he had autism until we came into the picture.
Wow. That is very interesting. Thank you for that. I, you know, so much of this film centers around Donald, and he is such a lovable character within the film and his story. And you told so well the history, and I think there is a lot that certainly could be learned. And for those not within the community, education. And it was so eye-opening for me. You know, Amy, if I could turn a question to you at this point, you know, given all of the voices and perspectives, and you know, shared so much of your personal story, I wonder if you would speak to a little bit about what you hope the conversations are that come out of this particular film.
Thank you, Jillian. Yes, well, obviously, you know, it's impossible to encompass everything about the spectrum into one film, one book, even two books. I don't think you could do it. I mean, J.R.R. Tolkien would be in awe at how much you could write about autism, you know, and this is a man who takes 27 pages to write about a tree. So it's a lot. And so I was so happy to be part of this, and happy to be able to share my story and to start what I hope is a conversation, because as has been said, this film was, you know, is aimed at kind of the neurotypical crowd, the people who are not within the autism community, who don't know anything about it. And so then for many folks, I think, who are autistic or who are in the community, some folks might feel a bit of a frustration, like why wasn't this addressed in the film? Where can, you know, why? And it's because there is only, you know, so much that I think we can do, but I would love to see it continue from here. I think this is only the beginning. I don't think it's the end by any stretch. I think the film has opened up an opportunity for a beautiful discussion, for us to especially perhaps hear more from non-speaking folks on the spectrum who you know, certainly have plenty to offer and plenty to share with us. and who are often misunderstood and misrepresented frequently in much of the media that's out there. So I would love to see, you know, them taking the reins in future narratives. Most of all, you know, one of the questions that's asked in the film is, how did they get it right? How did the folks in Mississippi there get it right with Don? And I think, you know, that's kind of the other flip side of the question. How do so many communities get it wrong? Right? Because we see a lot more examples of that. And there are, you know, as was seen in the film, there are so many factors that contributed to Donald's success, so many layers of privilege that just most autistic people and families do not have. So then I think it would be a great thing to look at, you know, what are we doing that's wrong, and how can we shift? How can we say, like, these are stories here that need to be heard and need to be told, and how can we use these to influence, you know, policy decisions and influence like larger things that affect all folks on the spectrum. So we start with a smaller pool of folks, and then we can say, how do we stretch this out so that we have everybody included in the conversation? That's what I'd like to see.
Agreed. And on that, you know, on that topic, Amy, it's sort of the perfect segue into something I wanted to ask Stephanie about, which is that, you know, the film touches on the hard questions of how race and wealth and privilege can change the landscape for autistic individuals. And, you know, Stephanie, based on your experience and expertise, would you talk about the intersectionality between race and disability?
Sure. Again, so privileged to be on this panel and in this film with everybody. It's been such a delight to be a part of Caren and John's project, and to spend any time with Amy is pretty great. So, but the intersection of race and disability is particularly important, especially when we think about Donald Triplet, right? Like when I teach my students here at UCLA, I talk a lot about like, well, community does get it right? Like they love this man in various ways and allow him to be part of their community and include him. And so he lives kind of a rich, full life in that manner. But what we also neglect to talk about is the fact, well, the film doesn't. The film does a beautiful job of this, actually kind of framing that there are things happening with Donald Triplet, right? Like that he is from a wealthy white family that allowed him to have some privileges that, you know, say a kid like mine just won't have. My son is from a working class Black family, right? And so he's encountering kind of a multitude of marginalities, right? Because, you know, I had a student once ask if I could, this is a terrifying question, but if I could take Dell's autism away to make him safe, right? Would I do it? Which the answer is like, nah. But if we really want to deconstruct this type of question, right? He'd still be Black, right? So he'd still continue to encounter that same type of like difficulty, though different in a racialized way rather than just a disabling way, right? And the kind of confluence of the two is what we're asking about and talking about. And I think what was so important and so lovely about Caren and John working with my family is that it allowed, I think, a lot of people to see the very basic thing for Black families raising disabled children is an inability to keep our babies safe. And it's that raw and it's that vulnerable and it's that deep. And the question and the thing that we're asking of the rest of American society is to help us keep our children safe. And that's just such a basic human question, you know, parent to parent, mother to mother.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm conscious of the time, and I also know that there are a lot of questions out there from the audience, but Caren and John, if I could turn one to you before we hand it over for audience questions. Has Don seen the film?
Don, you go ahead.
Yeah, we had our first public screening in Oxford, Mississippi, near the University of Mississippi. They have an annual film festival, and it happened in March. And we invited Donald, and not only did Donald come, but his family came and people from the community came, and Don watched it. And then we brought him up on stage and asked him what he thought of it. And he said he loved it. And we were like really, 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 really pleased by that, because he's trusted us for a long time. This movie, we started talking to him about doing it about 12 years ago, and he always said, I'll do it. And the sad thing is, his brother was with us all the way, and his brother passed away last year, and we so wanted him to see it, but at least Don got to see it and he loved it. So that was a really lovely moment.
That's lovely to hear. I know I personally enjoyed listening to so many of his friends in the community tell stories about him. And it still strikes me what you said, Caren, about how, until you both sort of came into the picture, autism wasn't what they used to describe Don. He just was Don. And I really think, as we go into questions, but as a society right now, we're having a lot of conversations. And I think that is an important takeaway for me, that, an autistic individual is just who they are. And we all want to belong. And it was, so interesting to see Don get to do that with his community and the village that sort of surrounded him. So
you could make that the argument of small community, because when we talked to Stephanie and her family, and when they go down to visit Wendell, her husband's family, they go down south to a small community where everybody knows Dell. Everybody knows and loves Dell, and he can go anywhere and do anything because he's in this small community that knows him and embraces him. And that's a, it's how do we make the world a smaller community? How do we get people to embrace people when they're not in a tiny little network?
Absolutely. Stephanie, did you want to add anything to that? I see you nodding. You don't have to, but.
No, just, yeah, when I saw Donald's story, it reminded me of our, in particular, my husband's family, who is, they're from a very small town, maybe 100 folks in the town, most of whom are related to, but we call it Dell's best good place, right? Like, and what was hard for us initially is that they didn't even really use his diagnosis of autism, right? They really wouldn't say the word. They just think about Dell as a human that's part of the family and needs certain supports and loves in different ways, and they just provide it. And I think that really mirrors what Donald is kind of experiencing.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to Isaac to put it forth for some additional questions, but thank you so much for answering so candidly and for putting this film forward. Isaac?
Thank you. Thank you, Jillian. We have a lot of questions coming in from the chat. If you have any questions, of course, please put them in the chat and we'll have you ask live. We're going to start with Donvan. Donvan, you're on the line.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be a part of this conversation. I loved the film. I have a son who has autism. And I saw John do a presentation at Syracuse University a few years back, myself and my husband. So it's so great that you made this movie. It's so important. But very quickly to my question, have you been in touch with Donald Triplett since the COVID closures began? I know how important going to the bank was for him. And, it is a small community. Maybe they didn't close, but I was wondering, how he's weathering the changes, if he hasn't been able to travel, I'm sure, but just curious if you've talked to him since.
Yeah, well, when we saw him in Oxford, that's what John was talking about at the film festival, which was just about a month ago. So he was very happy to be at the festival. The festival was very safe and did social distancing, and we all had masks on. But it was pretty joyous for everyone to kind of be together. My sense is the fact that it's a smaller community, it hasn't been as limiting. But in fact, Donald travels all over the world, and he's picked up and is doing that again. So happy to know that as well.
We have the next question from Alana. Alana, you're on the line.
I'll take my video on so that I'm not just a talking box.
You like seeing faces.
Yeah, we all do. So It's really nice to be a part of this as well. The film has really been impactful, and I think it shines a light on issues that people don't think about or talk about every day at this point in time. So I really appreciate that. And I wanted to ask about that scene. There's a scene in the film with police brutality that is something that has was so striking that it's I've been actually thinking about it all day. It was the way it was captured in the film was also, it was very jarring, and I'm wondering if
Oh, can't hear your question.
Ilana, we're losing you.
Your audio just went.
no.
Oh wait,
now
there you
you're
are.
back.
You're back.
I'm wondering if there's been accountability and what justice actually looks like in these cases. What should justice be?
In the case of Alaska, the family ultimately brought a lawsuit against the police department, and the police department settled, but did not apologize, did not acknowledge wrongdoing, and then they launched, we understand, a kind of training program in autism for the police department. And what's interesting is there's more body cam footage of incidents like this around the country. It's really, really quite common. Common is the wrong word. It's not unusual for this to be happening. And the good news is that police departments are, it's clear they don't want to be in the business of having acted in a brutal way with a person who has a disability, but there's this gap in understanding, and so more and more police departments are doing this kind of training. And we actually, when we filmed the training session for the film, that was in a different city completely. The scene of Nicholas being brought down and pepper sprayed happened in Alaska, but the training session we showed took place in Phoenix. I just remember, Amy, you told me that when you first watched the film, you just couldn't handle that scene. That it really just ripped.
I cried. I absolutely cried. It was so jarring and upsetting. I mean, it was extremely difficult to watch. It was that put me in tears. That and one other part were the two things that the black and white footage from the institutions with the child being slapped for treatment. Those were the two parts that made me cry. Absolutely.
I watched it, hundreds of times because I edited it together, and it's supposed to be jarring. It's supposed to be painful. Yes. Because we're not there. And if it gets your attention that, and you also see that there's a training program in the film, and there are ways to make a difference and help with this problem if we all kind of join in. And it's not just police departments, it's also families and people on the spectrum. We need to be educated as well. So, I can say to my son, Mickey, you have to have a car. I have autism, so that if you're out in the community and you can communicate, that you do communicate. But it's a two-way street, but really with the, police force needing education. And when they have it, they do better. And when they don't, they don't.
We also did a thing very deliberately in the film where we put that scene early in the film of a white man with autism having difficulty with the police. And then 40 minutes later, Stephanie, without ever mentioning the police, says, how are we going to keep our children safe? And suddenly you get, wow, autism plus being Black, that seed had been planted early in the movie, that by the time Stephanie says it, you know what she's saying is the compounded challenge there.
And if you don't, you should.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I hope that the film does is open up a conversation around what it looks like to have a disability, to be a racialized human, and to encounter police violence, right? Because we know that the numbers show us that up to 85% of children in juvenile detention centers have a disability that would qualify them for an IEP, right? We know that 50% of those murdered by police have disabilities, and the great majority of those are Black and brown. And so we really have to start theorizing police violence along with the lens of disability. Otherwise we can't get to the bottom of the problem, right? We have to be very upfront about how complicated this thing is, and really add disability to that conversation, which I think John and Caren are trying to help us walk down that pathway.
Thank you. We have another question. We're going to take a question from Mark Dreyfus. Mark, you're on.
Hi. Thank you for the film, and thanks for doing this Q&A. My question is, did Mickey, the one with stuffed animals, have anger issues or lash out when he was younger?
No, not really. He's pretty. It's not never, but he's a pretty gentle soul, actually. He talks a lot, but he's not an aggressive personality. But you can if you he's had his moments, on airplanes when a baby has cried for 5 hours, and I won't tell you exactly what happened, but it's not good. If you hit his sensory buttons, and one of them is babies crying, yeah, he will have a huge meltdown. So, and it doesn't matter where he is. But in general, he's a pretty gentle guy.
Thank you. We're going to try here, Robert and Elaine. Robert and Elaine, you had a question. Can we unmute you? One at a time.
And you might unmute. Are we unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, well, this question, I suppose, could be for anybody that's watching tonight, probably especially for John and Caren, but it's basically the whole theme that has been suggested is spreading from a very small community outward and outward until you reach the goal, as it were, of a larger community. And somebody had their hands up like this to illustrate that. And I just wonder whether this film in and of itself could serve that purpose if it were able to be seen by those who could then do the spreading.
I'm not quite sure. First,
well, it's the spreading out from a small community, as Forrest was, to a larger and larger community.
Do we want to see the film do that kind of ripple effect? Well, first of all, I want to say, am I getting that right, Elaine? First of all, I want to say that Bob and Elaine are known to us. Bob is not just a member of the JCC community who talked with us about this film festival for a year and said, this is the best thing ever. Best festival ever with the best summer ever. But was also kept encouraging us during difficult times in the film to keep going. So thank you for that. And I think what you're asking, Bob, is do we want this film to have an impact? Is that right? And to travel and get bigger and go farther and farther?
To accomplish that goal, yes.
My answer is yes, we do want that.
That's why we produced it. So now we're at the next step, which is getting it out to the world.
So how can this audience help that?
Yeah, that's how can that happen?
We're looking at kind of a mixed way of distribution. So we are in conversations with some distributors whose names you would recognize for possibly a national broadcast, possibly. But we also want to do something different because Caren and I did this to have conversations and to inspire conversations. And we really want to bring it one screening at a time to communities, to autism organizations, to universities, to medical communities, police departments, employers, human resources departments. We want to. So if anybody out there knows a community that you think would benefit from having a screening, and Caren and I would be happy to continue to be part of those screenings as conversations, or not. Maybe it would just want to be local conversations. But we're looking very hard at the technology now exists to do this, and It didn't even a few years ago. So we're looking at that kind of distribution. So that kind of word of mouth, organization to organization, community to community, sponsor to sponsor. I mean, if we can find a partnering organization here and there, we would like to, we would love that sort of benefit. So I guess that's what you're asking, Bob, is how we could make, or Isaac, thanks for putting it so pointedly, you know, how can it help? That would be how to help, I think.
Spread the word.
And we'll get your hashtag at the end, or whatever.
Okay.
Whatever we do these days to get the word out.
Thanks.
We have a question from William. William. You have to unmute, William.
There we go. Hey.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you guys?
I also just wanted to say that when my husband and I first saw the film, we were both very impressed with like how much dedication and work that you guys put into this film, and showing these people around the nation that anybody with autism has their unique ways. And in fact, both Will and I are from New Jersey. And this is another one question for Caren. So before Mickey moved into a supportive community in Arizona, what area of New Jersey did you and your family reside in?
Yeah.
We still reside in Tenafly. We moved to Tenafly when Mickey, after having, I did a home programming for the first few years of his life. And then we moved here because of, we had heard that Bergen County was one of the better places in the country, actually. And
as in Bergen County, New
Jersey.
New Jersey, wow.
And that was 20 something years ago. So there are more counties and more areas around the country that have support and education now than they did then. It was much tougher. So you were saying you're still living in New Jersey, or you were out there in Arizona because of Mickey and stuff, though? And back and forth. I still live in New Jersey, but Mickey's home right now for his birthday, and so he's there because there are still not enough programs of excellence around the country, and you know, that for adults with autism. We sort of kind of started to hit the hurdle for kids, that there are places around the country, but there's never enough. But for adults, it's really, we're still really, really lacking. And he's at, you know, I think one of the best programs in the country, and that's why he's so far away.
I'm going to take one last question from our friend Laura. Laura, you're on the line.
Mute. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this wonderful film. My question is for Stephanie. The example you gave of the racial disparities in diagnosis of autism was just so powerful and so striking, you know, calling child protective services versus getting mom or help at home. It was really powerful. I'm wondering what research you're doing now, where we can read some of the stuff you write or see some of the talks you've given, because I think your research is incredibly important. And you are muted. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I seem to keep myself muted. Okay, so thank you for asking, and I'm glad that was really useful for you. I'm currently writing my dissertation proposal. If you've done this process, you know it's a lot. So I'm working, continuing to work with Black families that have children with autism, both here in the LA area and nationally as well, kind of like following and tracing the ways that we start to understand the diagnosis, and then how that leads us to do things like found these massive organizations. Like if you haven't run into like Autism in Black, that's a great autism organization that's serving the Black community at this moment. So I haven't been in the clinic for a while, but I do have several chapters coming out this year that I've published, but again, that's one of those academic things that's not terribly useful because they're all in press and God knows when they will show up. I've had one that's been in publication for like 3 years, and maybe I'll get to see it someday. So if I can give you my email and keep you up to date, and happy to have any conversations with anybody who would like to continue this, but unfortunately, I don't have any good like open writing at the moment. It's all kind of in other people's books as edited volumes and whatnot.
Thank you. Folks, I want to thank everybody. First of all, I want to thank this amazing panel for taking these questions. I want to thank our audience for being a part of this conversation. And of course, I want to thank Jillian Leake for moderating this conversation.
Thank you, Jillian.
And Miranda from Lincoln Center for hosting us. Tomorrow night is our closing night, and we have two special events. One is a live reading of a new screenplay for television, a comedy called Disgraced. It's by Julie Klausner, and it's going to star Shannon DeVito. Also, Amy Sedaris is going to be there, and many other wonderful comedians. So join us for that at 5 p.m. Then at 7 p.m., we have our closing night event, and we're going to have a special guest. Temple Grandin's going to be there. Along with the film Not Going Quietly, we're going to have the star of the film, Adi Barkan, there, and it's going to be a fantastic conversation. So please, this is your last chance. You have 30 hours. Watch the movies. Tell your friends. They're available till tomorrow night. And join us for the last events. And of course, check out all the recordings on YouTube. Thank you all very much. And good seeing you. Have a good night.
Thank you for this, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.